we talk about jigs on a leg day. In our series Making Some Better Cornhole Boards, Scott covered how to make cornhole board legs. It involves putting a cornhole board onto your workbench, attaching a leg blank to that cornhole board, raising that cornhole board to 12 inches off your bench and swinging that leg blank out over the edge of your bench, marking where it meets your bench while the board's 12 inches off of it, and then cutting it, and you have yourself a cornhole board leg. It's called making legs the hard way, and we've all got to do it. But eventually your friends are going to find out that you make cornhole boards, so you're going to have to make a lot more, and suddenly you're going to need an easier way to move forward. So we're going to talk about batching legs. Let's just say I make 100 legs at a time. These are all right legs and just a few of what I made. And I don't even have boards to put these on yet. But they're going to fit, they're going to work perfect, and that's because I use a jig to reproduce a perfect leg. So let's talk about making a perfect leg. First, we get to go make a cornhole board leg the hard way again, which is fantastic, but we're going to control a few things this time. First, the leg angle. We're going to want to start out by making that leg angle match a hard stop on your miter saw. That's going to make it really easy to reproduce that perfect angle every single time. And that's easy. The next is the harder part. That's drilling a perfect hole. The hole needs to be straight, because if that bolt's slightly angled, it's going to shift the leg and all of a sudden it's not flat on the ground anymore, and that kind of sucks. So a drill press is going to help you make that perfectly straight, and then you're going to want to get that perfectly centered on your board. When it's perfectly centered on the board, that's going to help it match up with your leg frame and not matter which is the front and the back. So that's going to help you make legs independent of your cornhole boards. So what we need to do is reproduce that leg the hard way, so feel free to go back and watch that video, and then I'm going to talk to you about how to make a jig to reproduce that leg. So a jig is just a device that helps you reproduce the same action over and over with very little effort required. And this is my leg jig. It's going to help me reproduce that perfect leg that we just took great pains in making the first time to ensure that we don't have to take as much effort to do it again. Now, coincidentally, when we made the perfect leg, we also made a perfect frame. So we want to reproduce this hole placement for both of these parts, so we took it all apart, and now we're going to make a jig to reproduce these. So the jig is going to have a couple reference distances to ensure that we put that hole in the right spot. So as we spoke about earlier, we want the hole to be centered. So that way, whether I'm making a right leg or a left leg, that hole's going to be in the same spot. So it's going to be very independent, and this leg will fit every single frame, whether it's a right or a left, or it's a left and a right. We're all good to go. So what in the world am I talking about with reference distances? Well, this hole needs to be put in the exact right spot, not just in the center, but also it needs to be the right distance from the ground. So you're going to reference off of the foot of the leg. So your leg hole puts the bolt in the same position, so your board is the right height off of the ground. On your frame, we're going to reference from the back of the frame where your leg is going to swing out and hit, and ensure that the leg hole is the right distance and obviously, of course, centered. So we're going to make this jig. The jig is quite simple, even though this one might look a little complicated. Basically, it's a piece of wood that you're going to mount to your drill press. You're going to start out just by sliding your frame in. You're going to lower your drill press to mark that spot, and you got your drill bit going into the hole. And you're just going to add a couple rails where they're just safely off to the side. These are going to be reference points to where you can just scoot in your frame, and that way it's referencing off the back of the frame on the side, so you're centering your hole and you're putting it the right distance from the back. So I have these stops. So why do I have the bolts? Couldn't you just reference off of these pieces of wood? And you could, so you could drill one hole. However, the whole purpose of this thing is so we can batch it out and make a ton at once with very little effort. So whenever we're using a power tool, like a drill press, and the drill bit comes out, sawdust is going to fall out onto your jig. And as you slide your leg in, that sawdust could gather between the board and the reference wall. So then that's going to actually just shift your board away, and that hole is going to go in a different spot, and you've got an imperfect leg, which is defeating the entire purpose of what we're trying to do. So I just use bolts. These are carriage bolts. It's kind of a special flat head bolt. It's going to allow sawdust to just gather between the board and the reference wall, and it won't impact the placement of this frame. So the idea behind this is quite simple. The drill press is already in here. We're just going to then be able to move out the bolts to where they are flat up against the edge of the frame, and you're all good to go. And then this is going to be tightened up to where then you got that reference set. That one's quite simple. When the heck is this little thing? So we got these little side bolts, which is going to position the leg so you can get that hole centered. However, you're going to use a hand fill stop here to where you can just feel when the boards are flush, and that's going to get the distance right to this hole, and you're good to go. So we just spoke about making your leg angle match a hard stop on your miter saw. What I meant by that was your miter saw will click at certain angles, like 15 or 22.5 degrees, which is what my leg's set at. That's going to help me reproduce the exact same angle every single time. So what I do is I lower my saw at that angle. I'm going to lock that into place, slide my perfect leg up against it, and then I'm going to create a little stop that just has a little extra length because I like to round my leg. So I'm going to give myself just a hair more distance than I need, and I'm going to be able to reproduce this length and that angle over and over. So I'm going to unlock my saw, raise it up. I can throw a leg in there or two legs. Four. So now I've got 4 legs cut to approximately the right length at the exact right angle. Now let's go drill those holes. So a happy little side effect of drilling a hole through your leg is you're going to put a hole into your leg jig base. This kind of seems like a bummer, however that hole is going to help you align this jig onto your drill press just by simply lining up the hole with the drill bit. It doesn't matter at what angle your jig's at because your stops are going to position the boards at the right angle, and this drill press is going through this hole, which means your hole is going to be in the perfect spot. So then you would secure this jig to your drill press. If you don't have a dedicated drill press for this jig like I do, you might consider installing a bushing. A bushing is going to be a piece of metal with a very precise internal diameter. It's going to match the diameter of your drill bit, and so that way it will not wear out over time. So that way it's going to be quite precise. So we can drill the legs by placing the leg in. You're going to slide up to the back, and as you can see, all the sawdust is not impacting the placement, as it can slide up against these holes without any sort of obstruction. That's going to center the bolt hole on the leg, and then you're going to use the little precise feel stop on the end to ensure that the leg is in the right spot. With the elevator bolts, I'm able to stack and do 2 legs at once. Feel for that placement, push up against the back, and drill that hole. So then we can slide in our frames. Our frame will slide in, again, up against the back holes and all the way to the end. Now, in case there's any trolls out there right now zooming in and seeing this gap, you're going to say, hey, this isn't very precise at all. However, my crooked bolt does still stop my leg at the exact same spot every single time. I'm still able to stack 2 frames, slide them in, all the way to the end, push them all the way to the back, drill that hole. So now that we have our angle cut and our hole drilled, we got the exact right distance, the exact right angle. However, we just still have a squared end, so we can't open that leg. You could just cut off the corners, so that way it'll rotate open without hitting the board, or you could get a little fancy. We'll talk about this jig in a later video. And that's how you reproduce your perfect legs.